What do these three flags have in common? They all belong to the Axis powers of World War II. Two flag was faded, but one still left. Japan is rapidly shifting its security policy, moving away from strict post-war pacifism. Recent headlines show record defense budgets and a plan to reach 2% of GDP on military spending. Tokyo now openly discusses long-range missiles and the ability to strike enemy bases before they launch attacks. For many in Japan, this feels like a historic break with the post-war promise of never again becoming a military power. Supporters say the world around Japan has changed, and that the security policy must change with it. North Korean missiles, Chinese naval activity, and Russia's war in Ukraine are all cited as reasons for this new course. The latest budget proposals include money for Tomahawk cruise missiles and upgraded domestic long-range systems. Japan is revising self-defense force ranks and symbols to look more like a conventional army. Insists this is still about self-defense, framed as a sober response to a dangerous neighborhood. Critics warn that defense is a flexible word, and that Japan is slowly normalizing the idea of offensive capability. Abroad, allies praise Japan's new activism, while rivals accuse it of quietly abandoning its pacifist identity. Now show graphics of missile ranges, alliance plans, and rising defense outlays almost every week. The basic question: what kind of Japan is emerging from the shell of post-war pacifism? To answer that, we need to look back to the dark history of militarism and the Pacific War. Only by revisiting that past can we understand why today's policy shift feels so significant across Asia. Modern Japanese militarism began with the Meiji-era slogan of rich nation, strong army, and rapid industrialization. Victories over China and Russia convinced many that Japan was destined to be a great imperial power in Asia. The military gained growing influence in politics, dismissing civilian leaders as weak and naive about security. In the 1930s, economic crisis and nationalism helped hardliners justify expansion into Manchuria and mainland China. The invasion of China escalated into a brutal, prolonged war marked by atrocities against soldiers and civilians alike. Japan's leaders believed control of resource-rich territories was essential for survival in a world of empires. As the so-called ABCD powers restricted access to oil and materials, Tokyo increasingly saw encirclement and threat. In this logic, a preemptive strike on American forces at Pearl Harbor was framed as a desperate, necessary gamble. The early months of the Pacific War saw rapid Japanese advances across Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific. But decisive battles like Midway reversed the tide, destroying key carriers and shifting the balance of power. From then on, Japan was on the defensive, facing island-hopping campaigns that closed in on the home islands. In occupied territories, Japanese forces committed severe war crimes, massacres, forced labor, and sexual slavery. The war ended only after devastating firebombing, atomic attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Soviet entry into the conflict. Japan's surrender in 1945 brought not only defeat but also occupation, trials, and the dismantling of the imperial war machine. This traumatic history still shapes how Japan's neighbors view any sign of renewed military expansion today. After 1945, both Japan and Germany stood accused as aggressors, but their post-war paths diverged sharply. In Europe, the United States supported multilateral institutions that tied Germany into a shared European project. Organizations like the ECSC and later the European Union bound former enemies together through trade and law. NATO made Germany part of a collective security system with France, Britain, and other Western democracies. Through these structures, Germany could rebuild trust by acting as a partner, not a solitary power, in Europe. In Asia, by contrast, the U.S. built a hub-and-spoke system with bilateral alliances centered on itself. Japan, South Korea, and others were each linked to Washington, but not deeply to each other as equals. This architecture discouraged regional reconciliation and left many historical disputes unresolved between neighbors. At the same time, U.S. occupation policies preserved the emperor in Japan, avoiding a full break with the imperial past. In war crimes trials, many Japanese leaders portrayed themselves as protecting the emperor and the nation. In West Germany, by contrast, Nazi ideology and its leaders were more thoroughly delegitimized in public life. Later, German society saw strong student movements demanding honest confrontation with parents' wartime roles. This helped normalize public acknowledgement of guilt and responsibility within German democratic culture. In Japan, large-scale social movements challenging wartime denial were weaker and more fragmented. These structural and social differences still echo today in how each country talks about its past and its military. Post-war Japan began with Article 9, renouncing war and the maintenance of traditional military forces. Yet, by the early 1950s, Cold War pressures led to the creation of the self-defense forces under a different name. The logic was that while war and aggression were banned, a minimum right to self-defense could still be justified. In 1960, the revised U.S.-Japan Security Treaty anchored American bases and nuclear protection on Japanese soil. Japan grew into an economic giant while maintaining a formally modest military role tied closely to the U.S. alliance. The Gulf War of 1990 exposed limits of this model. Japan paid money but sent no troops, facing criticism abroad. To answer that criticism, Japan began sending SDF units to UN peacekeeping operations under strict rules of engagement. Each overseas mission stretched the interpretation of self-defense and made foreign deployments feel more routine. In the 2000s, the SDF supported the war on terror with logistics, refueling, and reconstruction efforts in distant theaters. A major shift came under Prime Minister Abe, who pushed for limited collective self-defense through legal reinterpretation. Security laws in 2015 enabled Japan to fight alongside allies in more situations, even beyond direct attacks on its territory. Large protests erupted as citizens argued that constitutional change should be explicit, not hidden in legal language. Despite opposition, the new laws took effect and layered new practices beneath the unchanged words of Article 9. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine and rising tension over Taiwan, Japan's strategy embraced counterstrike capabilities in writing. Recent plans add rank reforms, higher budgets, and security assistance programs to this long arc of gradual remilitarization. For the United States, Japan's rearmament is largely welcome, a key ally taking on more responsibility in the Indo-Pacific. Washington calls Japan's new strategy historic and highlights long-range missiles and higher defense spending as positive steps. For U.S. planners, a stronger Japan allows American forces to stretch further while sharing risks across the alliance. China, by contrast, presents Japan's moves as signs of revived militarism threatening regional stability. Beijing is especially wary of Japan's louder voice on Taiwan and its security aid to countries in the South China Sea. Chinese media frequently invoke memories of past invasion when criticizing Japan's new defense posture. South Korea's view is mixed. It sees value in cooperation but still carries deep scars from history and territorial disputes. Whenever Japan's security documents repeat claims over Dokdo, Seoul responds with formal protests and diplomatic pressure. Many Koreans worry about scenarios where the SDF might enter the peninsula under collective self-defense logic. In Southeast Asia, states like the Philippines and Vietnam actively welcome Japanese support as a counterweight to China. Japanese radars, patrol vessels, and training programs are now part of how these countries defend their maritime claims. These states remain economically tied to China, pushing them to hedge rather than fully choose sides. Indonesia and Malaysia are even more cautious, emphasizing neutrality and warning against new Cold War-style blocs. Overall, Japan's rearmament is seen as an asset by Washington, a threat by Beijing, and an ambiguous signal in ASEAN. This complexity turns Northeast and Southeast Asia into an intricate security puzzle shaped by hope, fear, and calculation. First, rearmament risks accelerating an arms race, as rivals cite Japan's buildup to justify their own. What begins as deterrence can evolve into a security dilemma, where every defensive move looks offensive to someone else. Second, there is a tension between Article 9 and democracy when reality changes through reinterpretation rather than open amendment. Avoiding a clear constitutional choice may bring short-term flexibility but can erode trust in the rules over time. Third, unresolved history adds fuel, as shrine visits and textbook debates reopen wounds in countries once occupied by Japan. For neighbors who feel Japan never fully owned its wartime crimes, stronger military power looks like the return of old fears. Fourth, deeper rearmament may tie Japan more tightly into U.S. strategy from Taiwan to the Middle East. In a future crisis, Japan could find itself drawn in by alliance logic rather than by independent democratic decision. Japan must stay weak, but they raise hard questions about how power is used and constrained. At the center of all this is the question of whose security is being protected and whose voice counts in making that choice. Ordinary people in Japan, Korea, China, and Southeast Asia will live with the consequences of leaders' security decisions. They are the ones who will face higher taxes, greater danger, or perhaps more deterrence and stability, depending on outcomes. Looking at history, we know that slogans of defense and peace have sometimes paved the way to catastrophe. Japan's path from militarist empire to pacifist state and now toward rearmament is a mirror held up to all of Northeast Asia. The real task is ours, to decide what kind of regional order we want before events decide for us.